Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Boardmasters with me, Chris Mullins. And today I kind of want to follow on from my recent video where I covered the games that I'd bought to replace Massive Darkness 2, and the link to that will be down below, and just sort of expand into the Kickstarter versus retail debate, because definitely in my short time in the hobby I have massively favoured Kickstarter. And following the whole Massive Darkness 2 thing, and then buying the sheer volume of games I was able to get to replace my pledge for Massive Darkness, has got me thinking about how I've gone about getting into this hobby, and whether I've sort of missed a trick prioritising Kickstarter first. And you know, I understand why publishers and game developers do it, because it takes out a lot of the risk for them, even the bigger companies like Come On and Awaken Realms, in that they're they get a greater percentage of the money, obviously, than if they do through retail, and they get a definite number of backers, so they're not having to necessarily guesstimate how many copies of the game they're going to sell and then manufacture that number. And they could be too many games, and then they've got dead stock and dead money, or it may not be enough, and then they, like Terraforming Mars, I understand when that launched, it was in a never-ending cycle of not being able to get enough copies made to satisfy the demand, and that would cause a lot of stress for the people making the game. So I definitely understand the publisher side of it, and obviously there's the smaller indie games that couldn't get made without crowdfunding, which probably doesn't happen enough on Kickstarter anymore. It has almost kind of developed into a grand pre-order system, from what I understand from other channels such as Board Game Co talking about it. Anyway, that's my interpretation of it. But for me as a consumer, it's something that I'm wrestling with. And again, this is going to be probably a bit of a rambling video rather than any coherent point, because I still don't really know where my thoughts are on it, because part of me kind of wants to ignore Kickstarter going forward and rely on retail, because cost is generally cheaper in my experience, other than very limited examples like Too Many Bones, for example. Chip Theory Games make a point of not selling their retail games cheaper than their Kickstarters, so you're not paying an inflated fee, which is great, I think, from that standpoint. But certainly most Kickstarters, certainly by the time you add shipping on, you're probably going to be paying certainly not a cheaper price. You may sort of break even, but generally, particularly when retail games go on sale, you're going to be paying a lot less down the line in retail than you are going to be paying on Kickstarter, which is kind of counterintuitive. And it's not something I realised when I first started diving in. I didn't realise just how dramatic the difference could be. Like, for example, in recent videos on village attacks, and in that Zombicide game, Zombicide Black Plague, which I covered in the Massive Darkness video, I managed to get those for like £40–45 each, which if I was paying a Kickstarter, I'd be paying closer to 100. Now, admittedly, there's a lot of extras and things, particularly with a Zombicide game, a lot of extra minis and characters and enemies and stuff that you will get in that Kickstarter version. But is it enough to warrant paying twice the price? And obviously there are other aspects in there in terms of the time difference between the Kickstarter arriving at your doorstep and the retail version being available, and then being available on that sale price, could be a number of years difference, but particularly on a game as popular as Black Plague. It's going to be a while before a significant sale hits on that. So that is a big consideration, and obviously that brings FOMO into the picture in terms of the fear of missing out, if I don't back the Kickstarter, will it be available at retail, which obviously is a big concern for some of the smaller games, and then how long after the Kickstarter launches will that retail version be available, and how long for it to be on sale. Could be a massive gap, and that is a real negative point for, certainly for me. I know some people are happy to wait, and they've got all the patience in the world, and they're not swayed by the sort of Kickstarter exclusive stuff. And you know, I really envy those people, to be quite honest, because I wish I had that restraint. But as I spoke about with Massive Darkness, FOMO was a big part of that purchase to begin with, as well as that added value of all the extra bits and pieces you get in a Kickstarter version. And whilst I kind of want to move away from Kickstarter to retail, those things are generally going to prevent me from doing it. I think it's those are such powerful factors for me, and that I find it very hard to resist. And going on from there, and expanding on the value proposition, particularly with Massive Darkness and Etherfields and other big games, when they start bringing in the expansions. And like I think with Massive Darkness, I think it was 12 or 17 boxes of content by the end of that. And you know, in terms of buying those boxes down the line, either many of them are exclusive, so they won't be in retail, so you have to rely on the second-hand market. And as Alex at Board Game Co points out, getting them down the line will cost significantly more if you're going to get these expansions. And that is a really powerful tool that I know these developers know about, and you know, cynically they're using that tool to draw out more purchases from consumers like you and me, because the expansions, obviously they're selling far fewer copies of those than they are of the main game, so they have to sell them. Well, it's incentivized for them to sell it in a bundle where they know they're going to sell it. It's that risk element again that I talked about, why a publisher uses Kickstarter to begin with. And it just becomes such an attractive proposition that, oh, well, if I'm getting that expansion, I may as well pay the extra few dollars to get that one, and then, oh, it's a smaller increment to get the next one, so I may as well just keep bolting everything on. And then it becomes a $490 pledge, like Massive Darkness 2 was. And I've done that with Etherfields. I've gone all in, Sundrop, waiting for that. Can't wait. Hopefully the end of the year I'll be getting that. But in the back of my mind, it's again saying to me, will I ever play all of those expansions? Or will they just be sitting on my shelf? I've got the expansions for This War of Mine, which I haven't opened yet. I've had the expansion to XCOM sat on my shelf for over a year that we haven't opened yet. And I mean, that's probably going to be a future video about my relationship with expansions and whether I will ever actually integrate them into a game. But yeah, I mean, it's a big incentive of the Kickstarters for me is these big, shiny, deluxe, huge collections of expansions and so much content and fantastic value, and then I'm probably never going to play it. And it's trying to reconcile the rational and the irrational sides of my brain that Kickstarter plays on. And, you know, I've got to find some way of rationalizing it, because even though I know Kickstarter is better value in terms of you're only buying what you need to buy, that is a better value than buying everything in an all-in at a much higher price, although each individual element is discounted more. And it's that eternal battle of trying to resist that. On top of that, I sort of mentioned deluxeified things, and I'm an absolute sucker for that. I love pretty components. I love deluxe things. I love minis. I love table presents. Even though these things don't really add to the gameplay as such, they just benefit the experience so much that I want them. The game that got me into this hobby was, well, not even the game, the campaign that got me into this hobby was Return to the Dark Tower. And that is entirely because of the idea of having this massive neoprene mat that covers the table, and then you've got a foot-high tower in the middle, the imposing presence in the centre of the map, and then all these minis going around and fighting each other, and just that tactile interaction and how it looks. And I have no idea if the game's even going to be good, but I want it. And the same with sun-dropped minis with Awakened Realms games, and I want them. Even though they don't really add anything to the gameplay, I need those deluxe components. And I think, as I mentioned in a previous video, one of my first retail experiences was Dinosaur Island, and the pink Triceratops meeples in that are so ridiculously awful that it ruins my immersion in the game completely. And to be quite honest, it's completely irrational, but I would never play that game again if I had to use those meeples, which is why in the gameplay video I used my son Alex's toy dinosaurs. And it's a strange one. It makes no difference, but it really, really irritates me to create a T-Rex and use a Triceratops meeple. I hate it. And it's completely irrational. It doesn't impact the gameplay in any way, but that experience has really scarred me on retail going forward, because if I'm going to be missing out on these components, then it is going to harm experiences potentially for me. And that is a risk that I don't know if I'm willing to take. And so, yeah, we kind of go roundabout to trying to talk myself into going retail and saving money and being sensible, and then knowing that this irrational side of me is just going to take over and is going to keep leading me down the Kickstarter route. And it's a strange one, because I know one thing you've probably picked up on if you've looked through my Kickstarter backlog videos, there isn't any sort of pattern or knowledge in terms of the games I'm buying based on the mechanics and what type of games I enjoy, because I'm still at the phase where I don't know that. There are very few games, there's a couple of games that I know I don't really enjoy or don't appeal to me, like Social Deduction doesn't appeal to me. Generally dexterity games don't appeal to me, other than Kabuto Sumo. But other than that, I'm generally buying based on theme or how pretty a game is, like Everdell and Honeybuzz and Etherfields as well, were games that I bought just because of how gorgeous the components are. And there are whole swathes of narrative games that I've bought because I love narrative video games, and I'm hoping that will translate across. And through my early experiences with This War of Mine and Seventh Continent, that seems to be the case. But again, I'm ordered so many games on that premise without knowing if that was the case or not. And yeah, as I said at the beginning of the video, it is just sort of a rambling, incoherent mess of thoughts, and I apologise for that, but I'm trying to rationalise the irrational part of my brain, and quite honestly, it's happening completely unsuccessfully, because I'm still regularly looking at Kickstarter, still following Kickstarter footage, and still prioritising Kickstarter purchases over retail. And even though I kind of know I've done it wrong by doing that, I can't stop. So please help me. Comment down below with some argument and tips or knowledge or things that may help me with this complete wrestling match that's going on between my brain, between the retail versus Kickstarter, because it is a match that retail is losing and it's losing badly, but purely because of irrationality. And I need help, so please help me. And I think I'll leave it there. So I hope you enjoyed watching that. Please do engage in the comments, because again, I've said it a few times now, I really do want to engage in dialogue with this community as much as possible. And with that, I hope you look after yourself, stay safe, and have a good one. Thank you. Bye bye now.